Okay, so this video is going to be a demonstration of thinking outside the box and how increasing our mobility allows us to do things that are non-standard in a way that actually works, and why it's important to increase our mobility to a point that we can start doing this, right? Because martial arts, it is not a solved sport. I mean, the whole scope, but even boxing, it's not solved, right? There's still things that evolve and new strategies that people are incorporating, and yeah, so you want to try new things if you're able to do it, right? Learn like a professional so you can break the rules like an artist, right? Okay, so we're talking about mobility in the shoulder girdle, the whole structure of the shoulder from back to front, right? We want to be able to think of our arms as ropes, right? We're mobile from the tips of our fingers to our wrists, to our forearms, to our upper arms, to our shoulders. They're all independently moving, right? Whereas when we're like this, it's more like a piston or a ram, right? So we're breaking it up into even more, and we're making them all loose. So that's where you get the first part of this is the warm-up, is just loosening up. And especially if you do this, you shake kind of down like this. You put blood into the hands and the lower part of the arm, and it'll actually give you like a pump that has a little weight to it, which will make it a little easier to conceptualize this with like a proprioceptive feedback, right? So I like to start this out by doing this, right? You're also probably going to warm up the shoulder girdle. So hopefully you have equipment that you can do like band pull aparts or face pulls or whatever. You're going to want to do rotations both ways. Want to stretch, right? Get them warmed up. Should be part of your regular warm-up, but especially for this drill. So, long term, there's things we can do to increase our mobility, but that's in separate videos altogether. But okay, so we're loose, right? And now we're looking at what we can play around with. A couple combinations that aren't done very often, but they can be done when we have good mobility and to a good effect. The first one is a left hook followed by a flicker jab, right? So hook, jab, and the jab is a little bit like a backhand. It's kind of like how Muhammad Ali threw it. It's not specifically a backhand because that's illegal in boxing. You have to hit with the front, right? You could do it in MMA, but it's another question. But, you know, it's more like up a little bit. You can do it to the sides. You can do it with all this range of motion. And if you see, I can stay still, punch here, punch here, punch here. Whereas if I do a regular jab, I have to actually move to be able to jab at those different angles. So that's the first benefit of it. But why are we doing this swimming hook followed by a jab, right? Well, we're assuming the hook has missed, right? I mean, if it lands, that's great. But it's what your opponent's going to do when you throw the hook that makes this important. Is they're going to do one of two things most commonly. If they step back, it's not going to work unless you're very long and you step out. But let's assume that they do either one of two main defenses, which is one, they put their hand up, right? They block like this, right? I have thrown, they've blocked. Well, now their face is open. So I come, I've missed because it's either been too short or it's hit their blocked hand. Now I go like this, right on their face, before they return their hands or they can parry it. Okay? Great, I scored. And the second, which is also related to the first, if they move positions, which they likely do because people don't stand static, is they bob and weave. They've come up into a new angle. Well, now like I saw, I can hook and then jab over here. So if their head goes over here, I can hit them where their new angle is on their face, right? And if you see, this little nuance about this type of flicker jab is if I have really good internal rotation, I can throw it with my fist in a neutral position, right? This is pronated, supinated, neutral. I don't know, I guess this isn't neutral, but it's like an upside down neutral, right? But you see the orientation of it? Because it's now narrower, I can get into that tiny space in between my opponent's guard when they're off in that new direction, because they're going to come up here. So they're a little covered here, right? But I get it right in between where their nose is. You also see that if I throw it after the hook, I throw it open, right? I could technically throw it all the way here. That's actually external rotation. So I want to have both. But this one is much more internal rotation, right? Both the combinations I'm showing are more internal rotation. But the reason why external rotation is important is because you never train internal rotation without external rotation, or they'll limit you, right? If you do lots of presses, you need to do lots of pulls. Same thing with motions that you're actually doing to increase mobility. They work, the antagonistic muscle groups work for both strength and mobility. So you need to keep that into effect for things like the connective tissues and so on. Again, this is another video that I'll get into when I'm actually showing the exercises and ways to program this and all that, right? The second one, where you need really good mobility now in internal rotation, is a hook followed by another hook that is downward, right? Now this looks like a really weird punch. Why would you throw that, right? Well, the same concept as the first punch, where they either block like this, right? In which case, if we hook downward, we can pry their guard off, like we're pulling it down, and then we can come up with either a third hook, a jab, we could come up with some kind of other offense, or after this and we land again, we can come down on their face, like rake their face down. We can hit the top of their head. This is all places that we're allowed to score. And if we do end up hitting their guard down far enough to where it actually pulls down, we can come up with an uppercut and really mess them up, right? But you also see that once you throw the first hook, when you come down, you're a little open, right? But when you go like this, look at this position. Doesn't it look like my elbow is very similar to how my shoulder is when I'm Philly shell and leaning back, right? It's very similar. And shout out to, I think he calls himself Icy Mike from Hard to Hurt, because he noticed this without this combination, but he noticed this defense that he was getting into like this a lot. And he's like, why is this working? It looks so silly. And one of the reasons is because it covers your whole body, right? The whole side of your body. It doesn't give them a good angle on your face, and you're protected pretty well, but you need to have good mobility to do it. And another reason is if they do try to throw a straight punch on you, they land on your elbow. If they land on your elbow, they're going to break their fucking fist, and they're not going to want to do it again, right? So think of the advantages you can have if you can hook like this, or maybe even like all the way like this, you know? It's not like there's no positions where that would be valuable, especially if you're up very close, right? Like in the closest range you get where you're like clinching. Because normally when you're clinching, it's very hard to land punches over, right? You don't land them over unless they're like these really short kind of punches like this, right? Especially with a long-armed opponent. But if you now have this weird angle like this, you know, can pry their guard down and then come up, gives you some other things to play with, right? And this is generally just a concept you should be thinking about in terms of creating other offenses and defenses with respect to things like mobility and other things that I talk about, right? You're trying to put it all together because we want to get to a point where we can come up with stuff on our own to invent our own strategy, where we don't have to always rely on a coach, because we might be in the gym 5 hours a week with instruction. What about the other however many hours in a week there are that you're thinking about boxing and not getting anywhere because you're thinking about concepts that you have to have instruction to progress, right? How do we become proficient enough on our own to where we can start learning on our own? Things to think about, right? Gives you a big advantage.